This is probably the number one question I get. I'm in the middle of a PhD studying climate science. It's literally my job to spend all day looking at climate models and trying to work out what all this means for the future. When I tell people what I do, I inevitably get some version of, so are we all screwed? And look, I get that. There's a lot of noise in this space. There's a lot of articles and studies. There's heaps of people with vested interests. So many people clamoring loudly, and some of them saying that we're on the verge of calamity. So it's nice to actually talk to somebody who gets the time to sit down and study this. You have questions about climate change, and I want to answer them. And we're starting with the most common one. So, are we all doomed? The answer, as always, is it depends. Is humanity all about to be killed off by extreme temperatures? No. Is this all a big whoop over nothing and everything will be fine? Also no. Are large parts of the globe at risk of becoming effectively uninhabitable? Well, yes. Are the ecosystems that we rely on for our global scale food production under threat? Also yes. Are human settlements that are in the path of sea level rise and increased natural disasters going to face some unprecedented challenges? Yes again. Will climate change worsen the risk of other existential threats like war and famine? Yeah, it will. So can we stop climate change? No. Not anytime soon. It's already happening. But can we change course to prevent the worst outcomes and adapt to the new reality? Yes, we can.
So we're not all about to die, but our current lifestyle of burning unlimited quantities of fossil fuels and consuming more than the planet can provide, well, that is doomed. Whether it dies in the Pyrrhic fire of pushing the planet to the brink of collapse, or is pushed aside to make way for a more sustainable future, is up to us.
I want to unpack this idea that climate change will kill us. And listen, I support climate demonstrations. I believe in the power of the voice of the people. I think that groups for Fridays for Future and Sunrise Movement are doing really important work. But I do have a little bone to pick. This claim, you will die of old age, I will die of climate change, bothers me. For starters, it creates this us and them dichotomy that I think is kind of unhelpful. It tries to guilt trip decision makers instead of recognizing our common cause. The top 4 leading causes of death worldwide are some form of cardiovascular or respiratory disease, both of which are caused or exacerbated by fine particulate air pollution, the biggest source of which is the combustion of fossil fuels. So boomers are already being killed by fossil fuels. This is not just a millennial or Gen Z problem. But more importantly, this claim just isn't true for the majority of people. Why is that? Well, it's incredibly difficult to attribute a given death to climate change, but there is a new field within climate science called detection and attribution. Take an event as big as a heat wave, say the record-shattering one that happened in Western North America in 2021. Scientists take the observed weather conditions for that event and they compare it to history to work out how likely it was, its return period. They then run multiple climate models and try to match that probability distribution for that type of event. They can then adjust those models to reflect what the climate would have been like without human influence. So lower carbon dioxide concentrations, meaning less energy in the system, lower temperatures. And then they run those models again. They can then get a picture for how likely that event would have been in a world without climate change, or similarly, how severe an event of the same likelihood would have been. That North American heatwave, which killed an estimated 1,000 to 1,400 people, was found to be at least 150 times more likely because of climate change. Could you then say that 149 out of 150, or 99.3% of those deaths were caused by climate change? If so, which ones? Also, there are lots of different ways to define the severity of a heat wave. Which is the right one? How do you account for internal variability? Which observations can you rely on? We are developing and working on standards for these types of questions, but there is a lot of subjective decision making that goes into this type of analysis. Attributing climate change as the cause of death is simplified at best. Also, the industries that released these emissions created products that allowed our population to grow in the first place. So it's like, what's the real counterfactual here?
It's a bit of a mess. But I want to be clear, climate change is making natural disasters worse. People are being killed who would not have had temperatures been lower. Climate change is causing deaths and will continue to do so. But will it cause your death? If you're watching this, probably not.
The actual number of people dying from natural disasters has decreased over the last century. By a lot. And this is despite population growth. The reason is because we have better systems now for predicting these events, preparing for them, and treating those people who have been affected. As countries develop, their resilience to disasters increases. And it is a cruel reality that poorer countries, those least responsible for climate change, will be those who experience the most heating relative to their background climate. Extreme heat and droughts are particularly acute risks for places like northern and equatorial Africa, the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia. If you care about your fellow human beings, you really should support efforts to share money, resources, and expertise to help all of the world adapt. Even if you only care about yourself, you should still support these efforts so that other countries can continue to engage in global trade and not present security threats or migration challenges. It's in everybody's best interests. Developed countries will still get hit, but because they have the resources to save lives, it's more just stuff that will get broken. Okay, quick pause here. I filmed this back before Cyclone Gabrielle hit New Zealand, and as I'm editing this, the country is still reeling from the impacts of that disaster. The death toll may not be all that high by international standards, but every one of those deaths is an absolute tragedy, and I really don't want to minimize the trauma of losing your home, or your business, or the landscape where you and your ancestors grew up. Lesser impacts does not mean low impacts. Alright, back to the video. If you ask the scientists who study climate change, there aren't any credible near-term scenarios under which we create a runaway greenhouse effect and the Earth becomes uninhabitable. Certain regions, yes, but the whole globe, no. The worst case scenarios that scientists model, those leading to like 5 degrees of warming this century, they require some crazy assumptions like massive increases in the amount of coal that we burn. But Hunter, you say, what about tipping points? To which I say, how do you know my name? Tipping points are where natural systems enter positive feedback loops that lead to more and more warming. The thing is, there isn't a single global tipping point between habitable Earth and uninhabitable. There are multiple that activate at different levels of global warming. And some of them, like the collapse of the AMOC ocean current, would actually have a net cooling effect on the globe. That kind of doomsday runaway warming requires multiple cascading tipping points where each one activates the next. And that is a plausible scenario, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about when it might happen. And our current understanding is that it's pretty unlikely below 3 degrees of warming. Even if we do cross those thresholds, the effects will play out over the course of centuries or decades at worst, not years. We would have some time to adapt. And look, this is not reason to relax. Even keeping warming to less than 3 degrees will require drastic changes to the world economy, including a near complete phase out of fossil fuels in the next few decades. Beyond 1.5 degrees, it looks like we're likely to cross some ice shelf tipping points that lock in several meters of sea level rise, and those cascading tipping points could happen at lower temperatures if we're unlucky. We'll need to work hard, but we've already started. Joule for joule, it's now much cheaper to build new solar photovoltaic or wind generation than it is to build new fossil fuel power plants. In some cases, it's even cheaper than keeping old fossil fuel plants running. These are some possible CO2 emissions pathways that were set back in 2007, ranging from strong reductions to massive increases.
Burn the house down! Burn them all!
And this is what our emissions have actually been. It wasn't looking good for a while there, but we've started to turn the corner. We've got a long way to go, but we could be doing a lot worse.
So what about the indirect effects of climate change? Yeah, it increases the risk of threats like war and famine and disease. But will those become leading causes of death? in your country? Like, I know this is way beyond my area of expertise as a climate scientist, but it just doesn't strike me as likely. Look, think of it this way. All the powerful factions in the world, governments, corporations, even fossil fuel companies, they have a really vested interest in society not collapsing. People will be working hard to prevent that. You can't make money if all your customers are dead.
So humanity is not at imminent risk of complete extinction due to climate change. We don't need to exaggerate the threat, it's already scary enough. The reality of climate change is that it's possibly the largest threat our species has ever faced. Not meeting this challenge head on will mean immeasurable and preventable human suffering. It will take unprecedented collaboration, change, and innovation in order to combat it. And we've already missed the boat for an easy, gradual transition. We've already warmed the globe by over 1 degree Celsius. But it will never be too late to make things better. Every fraction of a degree counts. The transition has already begun. The majority of the global population recognizes the threat of climate change and is motivated to combat it. So, what can you do about it? Well, that's a whole other question.